Good morning. I'm Ken Hold it. Let's start over. Good morning. I'm Ken Fadner, Chairman of MediaPost. Welcome to OMA DDM, Data-Driven Marketing. It's a new show in our series of shows for the digital advertising, media, and marketing industry. And we thank you for coming out early to get started with us. We've got a great program ahead for you. I want to recognize right away our sponsors, Exponential, our title sponsor, and MediaMath. You'll be hearing from both of them over the lunch hour. I hope you'll stay and give them your attention. I'm sure it will be well worthwhile. MediaPost is deeply committed to covering all facets of real-time marketing and data-driven advertising. We have, as you probably, I can't see anybody out there because of these lights. I was going to ask for a show of hands, but I wouldn't see anyhow, so I'm going to pretend that all of you raise your hands when I ask this question. We've recently started in January a little daily publication called Real-Time RTM Daily. How many of you are getting that publication? Wow, the whole room. If you're not, you should check it out because it's all about, every day, all about everything having to do with how the world of advertising, media, and marketing has moved toward a world of real-time data, real-time creative even, real-time flash media events. And marketers are beginning to find all the resources they need to deploy their activities towards reacting to the marketplace in real time. So we're covering it every day. Our editor-in-chief, Joe Mandisi, it's his brainchild. He's the one who has, mainly driven MediaPost to call its attention to this developing area. Of course, we've been covering aspects of data and targeting and behavioral advertising for many years. We had a long-running series called OMA Behavioral, which, I don't know, I think it started like 6 years ago. And, we found over time it grew like, I don't know, like a very robust young baby. And grew to be oversized, and we found that it was really like a code word, in a way, behavioral, for all things having to do with scientific marketing in the digital world. And but over time, of course, the world outgrew that narrow term. And so we've attempted to keep up with it and perhaps even lead it a little bit. In that series, this is all a commercial for MediaPost, by the way. And then I'm going to introduce our programmer and MC for the day. In the nature of being committed to that field, we've launched something this year called the RTB Roadshow. We did an OMA RTB in New York in January. We were in San Francisco in March. We're going to be in London in June 11th, if you happen to be over there. We're in LA end of July, or third week of July. I'm not sure exactly what those dates are. And so we're covering real-time buying in a deep and focused, concentrated way in a number of shows across the country. So and then we go on, by the way, to Chicago and Seattle in November. And I suppose we'll be back in New York next January if you're really planning ahead. Of course, in the world of real time, you really don't need to plan that far ahead because everything could change. But our schedule's not going to change. So enough about that. But there is one other show I want to call your attention to. It's our Brand Marketer Summit. It's taking place third week of June in Kohler, Wisconsin, where they play a lot of golf. I'm from Wisconsin, and I heard about Kohler my whole life. And people talked about the great golf at Kohler, Wisconsin. I'd never been there till last June, and it is a very beautiful golfing mecca. And it's a fun little sleepy Wisconsin town, too. So you might think about coming out there because its theme this year is real-time marketing, and it's aimed entirely at the brand marketer to try to help them get on top of this rapidly changing phenomenon. It's real-time marketing, time and data wait for no brand. So that's it for me. I'm going to turn it over now to Steve Smith. Steve Smith, who I've introduced a lot of times, he does a lot of everything for MediaPost, and we're delighted for his help and support. He's been the programmer of, I think, all of our, along with Joe Mandisi, our editor-in-chief, they've programmed all our data and real-time shows. They have a great expertise in the field. No one knows more. If you want to know about what's going on in the field, you should know these guys, Steve Smith and Joe Mandisi. So Steve, I know you're out there somewhere. Come on up and take us through the day. I guess he's back here.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, those lights are bright. And I know you're out there, because I can hear you breathing. Today is going to be about how much fun data is, and in fact it is. I've been covering it now since we started the behavioral shows back in 2007, and every week in the Data and Targeting Insider that I write. It is fascinating. It's fascinating to find the affinities that companies find, and I think one of the things that we'll find today is how creative data has become. And of course it's not new. It's also one of the things that you'll be hearing today is that there's nothing entirely new about data-driven marketing. The age of data-driven marketing has been going on for as long as people have been crunching numbers. Magazines have always had lists. Direct response has always had mail. Even infomercials have been crunching the conversion numbers to optimize campaigns and even test new markets. Most of the basics have always been there. Data didn't just get big, however, in the last couple of years. It got different, and that's what's made it especially interesting. Much of the torrent of new, bigger data that we talk about over the last few years, a lot of it is coming from that spigot we call social data. And it's data of a different kind. It's data of a more intimate kind, but it's also much more unstructured. It takes more finesse, more interpretation. It needs to be integrated in new ways. So what we've got here now that is different from the data we've always seen before is this huge morass of incompatible inputs, offline, online, structured, unstructured, first party, third party, that itself has created a whole new Luma chart of providers, some of whom we'll be talking about and hearing from today. It's a whole new supply chain that many of you have to navigate and understand. That's one of the reasons that we do these shows. And many people don't appreciate how, how several years ago when we started talking about how big data, exactly how disruptive this was going to be in so many fundamental ways. When we did our first show in this series back in January, it was one of the things that we've heard, and in my coverage of the field over the last few years, it's sort of the constant refrain that I get from executives is just how hard this is to implement within organizations. Data, after all, allows for a lot of real-time response. It's one of its key elements, is the ability to respond in real time to changing circumstances, even trends. But that also means that brands lose some degree of control over the message, or at least they're often moving that responsibility out to third parties. We've seen some of the detrimental effects of that over the last couple of months. Data does not live nicely in traditional corporate silos. Data is about finding interconnections, very often forcing people to rethink whether the structures they've been living under, sometimes for decades within corporations, really make sense, given the ways in which the data suggests a greater interconnectedness among departments is required. And in order for data to be fully integrated, and this is the thing I hear a lot of when I talk to executives about how data is being incorporated into their marketing, it requires new skill sets. You need people whose eyes don't glaze over at the sight of a spreadsheet, who don't simply overlook that email that has the latest flowchart in it or has the latest graph in it. You really need people who know throughout the organization what data means, what it can do, why it's relevant to their jobs. And most of all, it means, I think a lot of companies are finding how it's blurring the lines between what a CMO does, what a CIO does, and what a CTO does. In many ways, in the higher echelons of most corporations, that sort of is the emblem of what's really needs to go on throughout the organization. We're going to engage all of those issues today, I think. Most of the agenda touches on pieces realities of that. And we've tried to advance the conversation a bit from our first show just 5 or 6 months ago. But I also want to plant another little bug about data-driven marketing and another aspect of data that's come up recently. I've written about it recently and is of special interest to me, and that is sort of a word about the consumer and the consumer's relationship to data. And it's not necessarily the usual way that we talk about consumers relating to data in terms of privacy and protection and security. But also one of the things that I've been seeing, and some of the stats I've been seeing, is a growing dissatisfaction among a lot of consumers about the ways in which companies are gathering data but not using it very effectively in making their lives easier. For instance, I just covered a new survey that had to do with the growing dissatisfaction that people have with and frustration that people have with customer service and with a lot of e-commerce sites that ask for data, the same data input again and again and again, leading to tremendous frustration and often people abandoning carts or hanging up the phone. What consumers are starting to see is there's certain consumer savviness that's going on, a new consumer relationship to data itself. The corporation and marketers aren't the only ones who are part of the data revolution. People are too. They're, after all, the ones who are inputting this data. They have a certain savviness about how this data could be used to make their lives easier. And they're starting to get more frustrated over the fact that companies aren't necessarily making good use of it. And they're starting to resent it. It's an interesting phenomenon. So when we talk about data-driven marketing, one of the things we also have to talk about is how companies need to satisfy consumers' rising expectations about what the company should be doing with the data to make their lives easier. As well, productizing data. We've already seen just in the last couple of years the ways in which data is not just something that lives within corporations and within enterprises, but it's actually being used now to create, to be put into the hands and the control of consumers in great new products. I mean, some of the best ones, for instance, are the ways in which spending trackers are helping people get greater control over their own budgets. But also fitness trackers. My own wife, for instance, comes home every day now she has the Nike Plus app on her iPhone, telling me how many, that she's now run 300 miles since since she started, and how she's and she's tracking all of that information. She's been put in control of her own data. It's been made into a product, something that she can use. All of this stuff is a part of that larger transformation we're seeing in how data is being used, not just by marketers, but even by consumers, and it's a part of this broad equation. So that's a lot to cover. But let's start with a company that probably has done more than almost any company that I can think of, and it's one of the reasons we invited them here today, to understand the importance of digital data. 1-800-Flowers understood how data works for them.